All right, let's talk about one of the most unbreakable chains in the entire Imperium of man, the Imperial cult. This isn't just a religion. It's an all-consuming doctrine that shapes every aspect of life, from the prayers whispered before battle to the endless labor of hive city workers who never see the sky. It dictates the law, justifies war, and demands absolute obedience under the threat of damnation. There is no room for doubt, no space for questioning. Faith isn't a choice in the Imperium, it's survival. But let's be real here. The Imperial cult is not just about worshipping the God Emperor. It's about control. It's about shaping billions of minds into a single, unthinking mass that will obey without hesitation, fight without fear, and die without question. It's the reason why Imperial citizens accept lives of suffering, why guardsmen charge into hopeless battles, and why entire worlds are burned for the mere hint of heresy. Yet, for all its brutality, there's a paradox at the heart of the Imperial cult. It keeps the Imperium together, but at what cost? Does blind faith make humanity stronger, or has it turned the Imperium into a rotting corpse propped up by zealotry and fear? To truly understand how the Imperial cult enslaves billions, we need to start from the very beginning, how this faith was born, and how it grew into the iron grip that holds humanity in chains. The Imperial cult wasn't always the unshakable monolith of faith that it is today. In fact, when the Emperor first walked among mankind, he despised religion. He saw it as a tool of manipulation, a weapon that had been used to divide and weaken humanity for millennia. The irony, of course, is that he would later become the very thing he opposed, a god in the eyes of billions, a figure so deeply ingrained in the psyche of the Imperium that entire civilizations live and die by his name. But how did it come to this? How did a man who rejected divinity become the cornerstone of the most oppressive and all-consuming faith in the galaxy? It all started with the Great Crusade. The Emperor had a vision, one of unity, reason, and a humanity freed from the shackles of superstition. He led his legions across the stars, bringing order to the fractured remnants of mankind, toppling false gods and dismantling primitive beliefs that had flourished in humanity's long age of isolation. But here's the thing. Faith is not so easily erased. For every world the Emperor liberated, there were countless people who saw him as something far greater than just a ruler or a warlord. His power was beyond anything they had ever witnessed. He wielded abilities that defied understanding, shaped the fate of entire planets with a single command, and, most importantly, never seemed to age or weaken. To the common people, this wasn't just a man. This was a god. And that belief, whispered in secret, denied by Imperial officials, yet growing like a wildfire, would not be stopped. Even as the Emperor and his followers tried to enforce the Imperial truth, a philosophy of strict secularism and reason, faith in him only grew stronger. The truth is, humans crave something to believe in, something greater than themselves. And despite all his efforts to stamp out religion, the Emperor became the very thing he sought to destroy. The tipping point, though, was the Horus Heresy, the betrayal of his most beloved son, the war that shattered the Imperium, and the Emperor's final tragic fate on the Golden Throne. This was the moment that changed everything. The Imperium needed something to hold on to. It needed a reason to justify the unimaginable suffering it had endured. And so, the myth of the God Emperor was born. The Emperor was no longer just a ruler. He was the savior of mankind, the eternal guardian who had sacrificed himself to protect humanity from darkness. The ecclesiarchy, formed in the centuries after, would ensure that this belief spread to every corner of the Imperium. Of course, there are those who argue that the Imperial cult was inevitable. Even if the Emperor had survived, even if the Horus Heresy had never happened, some form of worship would have emerged. Humanity has always deified its greatest figures, turned kings into gods and warriors into legends. Perhaps the Emperor was always doomed to become a god in the eyes of his people, whether he wanted it or not. But here's the tragic part. The Imperial cult was not created by the Emperor. It was created by those who came after, by those who needed a way to justify their rule, to maintain order in an empire that should have crumbled. The faith that now grips the Imperium is not one of enlightenment or salvation. It is a faith built on fear, on control, on the absolute submission of billions who dare not question the world they live in. And the most damning truth of all, the Emperor himself, if he were still capable of thought, would likely see it as a betrayal of everything he once stood for. The Imperial cult wasn't always the unshakable monolith of faith that it is today. In fact, when the Emperor first walked among mankind, he despised religion. He saw it as a tool of manipulation, a weapon that had been used to divide and weaken humanity for millennia. The irony, of course, is that he would later become the very thing he opposed, a god in the eyes of billions, a figure so deeply ingrained in the psyche of the Imperium that entire civilizations live and die by his name. But how did it come to this? How did a man who rejected divinity become the cornerstone of the most oppressive and all-consuming faith in the galaxy? It all started with the Great Crusade. The Emperor had a vision, one of unity, reason, and a humanity freed from the shackles of superstition. He led his legions across the stars, bringing order to the fractured remnants of mankind, toppling false gods, and dismantling primitive beliefs that had flourished in humanity's long age of isolation. But here's the thing. Faith is not so easily erased. For every world the Emperor liberated, there were countless people who saw him as something far greater than just a ruler or a warlord. His power was beyond anything they had ever witnessed. He wielded abilities that defied understanding, shaped the fate of entire planets with a single command, and, most importantly, never seemed to age or weaken. To the common people, this wasn't just a man. This was a god. And that belief, whispered in secret, denied by Imperial officials, yet growing like a wildfire, would not be stopped. Even as the Emperor and his followers tried to enforce the Imperial truth, a philosophy of strict secularism and reason, faith in him only grew stronger. The truth is, humans crave something to believe in, something greater than themselves. And despite all his efforts to stamp out religion, the Emperor became the very thing he sought to destroy. The tipping point, though, was the Horus Heresy. The betrayal of his most beloved son, the war that shattered the Imperium, and the Emperor's final tragic fate on the Golden Throne. This was the moment that changed everything. The Imperium needed something to hold on to. It needed a reason to justify the unimaginable suffering it had endured. And so the myth of the God Emperor was born. The Emperor was no longer just a ruler. He was the savior of mankind, the eternal guardian who had sacrificed himself to protect humanity from darkness. The ecclesiarchy, formed in the centuries after, would ensure that this belief spread to every corner of the Imperium. Of course, there are those who argue that the Imperial cult was inevitable. Even if the Emperor had survived, even if the Horus Heresy had never happened, some form of worship would have emerged. Humanity has always deified its greatest figures, turned kings into gods and warriors into legends. Perhaps the Emperor was always doomed to become a god in the eyes of his people, whether he wanted it or not. But here's the tragic part. The Imperial cult was not created by the Emperor. It was created by those who came after, by those who needed a way to justify their rule, to maintain order in an empire that should have crumbled. The faith that now grips the Imperium is not one of enlightenment or salvation. It is a faith built on fear, on control, on the absolute submission of billions who dare not question the world they live in. And the most damning truth of all, the Emperor himself, if he were still capable of thought, would likely see it as a betrayal of everything he once stood for. The power of the Imperial cult isn't just in its scale, it's in its absolute, unshakable grip on the minds of trillions. This isn't just faith. This is control at a level so complete that most Imperial citizens never even consider the possibility of thinking for themselves. It's not that they refuse to question their reality, it's that they've been conditioned so deeply that the very concept of questioning is beyond them. And that is the true genius, if you can even call it that, of the Imperial cult. It doesn't just demand obedience, it makes disobedience unthinkable. At the heart of this control is fear. Not the kind of fear that keeps people up at night, but the kind that seeps into the bones, the kind that defines existence itself. Fear of the heretic, fear of the Xenos, fear of the Psyker, fear of the Inquisition, and above all, fear of failing the Emperor, because failure is not just a personal loss. It is a betrayal of humanity itself. A simple doubt, a moment of hesitation, is enough to condemn entire families, entire cities. The punishment for heresy isn't just death, it's annihilation, erasure, the utter destruction of everything and everyone connected to the crime. And when the consequences are that extreme, the safest course of action is simple. Obey, believe, never question. But fear alone isn't enough. If it were, rebellion would still be possible. No, the real strength of the Imperial cult lies in its dogma, in the way it reshapes reality itself. Every aspect of life is a ritual. Every day begins with prayer. Every action, no matter how small, is an offering to the Emperor. There is no separation between religion and existence. Faith is woven into the very fabric of society. It's not just that people believe in the Emperor, it's that they cannot imagine a world where belief isn't necessary. The ecclesiarchy understands this perfectly. They don't just rule through sermons and scriptures. They rule through symbols, through architecture, through the relentless repetition of doctrine. The hive cities, with their towering cathedrals and endless shrines, are physical manifestations of faith. The statues of the Emperor that loom over every street are not just decoration. They are reminders, warnings, silent overseers, ensuring that no one forgets who they serve. Even the language of the Imperium is shaped by religion. There is no government, only the holy orders. There is no army, only the Emperor's chosen, warriors. Everything is framed through the lens of faith, so much so that even those in power often fail to see the truth beneath it. And then, there is the Inquisition, the ultimate enforcers of faith. They are the blade that ensures no heretical thought ever takes root, the hunters who purge doubt before it can spread. The terrifying part: most citizens will never even see an inquisitor. They don't have to. The idea of the Inquisition is enough. The knowledge that they could be watching, that they could appear at any moment, is what keeps the machine running. In a way, the Inquisition doesn't need to root out heresy. It just needs people to believe that heresy is always being rooted out. The paranoia does the rest. And so, the Imperial cult thrives, not because it offers salvation, but because it eliminates alternatives. It is a system so vast, so all-encompassing, that escape is impossible, not just physically, but mentally. The people of the Imperium do not live under the rule of a government. They live under the rule of an idea, and ideas, when wielded correctly, are far more powerful than any army. Life in the Imperium is not just hard, it is an existence of endless toil, suffering, and submission. To be an Imperial citizen is to be nothing more than a cog in a machine, a disposable part of a vast, uncaring system that demands absolute devotion and rewards it with nothing but survival. And even survival is never guaranteed. The Imperial cult ensures that billions willingly accept this fate, convinced that their suffering has meaning, that their endless labor is a sacred duty rather than an inescapable prison. The reality is brutal. The vast majority of Imperial citizens will never leave the place of their birth. A factory worker in a hive city may live and die within the same 10 square kilometers of metal and smog, toiling away in suffocating conditions from childhood until their body inevitably fails. There are no weekends, no retirement, no upward mobility. You are born into a role, and you stay in that role until you drop dead. And yet, no one protests. No one rebels. Why? Because the Imperial cult tells them that this suffering is righteous. The Emperor watches over them, and to work is to serve him. The harder they labor, the more they prove their devotion. There is no dream of a better life, only the hope that their sacrifice will earn them a place in his light after death. This is the true horror of the Imperial cult. It doesn't just enforce suffering, it justifies it. The idea of fairness, of progress, of individual ambition is stripped away and replaced with pure servitude. Every task, no matter how grueling, is presented as an act of faith. The laborers who spend their entire lives assembling laser guns they will never fire, the scribes who spend decades copying the same holy decrees onto parchment, the soldiers who march into battle knowing they are nothing more than expendable bodies. They are all told that their suffering is part of the Emperor's divine plan, and so they obey. They work. They die. Even the concept of wealth in the Imperium is warped by faith. In most societies, wealth means power, influence, comfort. But in the Imperium, true wealth is measured in devotion. The noble houses, the high lords, the ruling class, many of them are just as bound to the Imperial cult as the lowest workers. Their status is not justified by their intelligence or skill, but by their divine right to rule. Those who fail to demonstrate the proper piety risk losing everything. A planetary governor who is seen as lacking in faith will not only be removed, he will likely be executed. The higher one climbs, the more they must publicly reaffirm their devotion, proving that they are not just rulers, but instruments of the Emperor's will. And yet, for all its supposed unity, the Imperium is drowning in inequality. The aristocracy enjoys luxuries beyond imagination, while the workers live in squalor. But no one questions this, because faith has made it unquestionable. The noble-born are simply closer to the Emperor, their wealth a sign of his favor. The poor are poor because it is his will. The destitute are told that their suffering is a test, that their devotion must be proven through hardship. And so, the cycle continues. There is no revolution in the Imperium. There is no workers' uprising, no grand movement demanding better conditions. To even think of such things is heresy. And heresy does not end with exile or imprisonment. It ends with fire, with entire cities being purged to erase even the possibility of rebellion. The idea of resisting is not just dangerous, it is unthinkable. And that is the true power of the Imperial cult. It has created an empire where people do not need chains to remain enslaved. Their faith is the chain, and it is a chain they will never break. If the Imperial cult is the unbreakable chain that binds humanity, then the Adeptus Ministorum is the hand that tightens the noose. The ecclesiarchy, as it is more commonly known, is not just a religious institution. It is a vast, all-encompassing machine of control, one that has perfected the art of using faith as both a weapon and a shield. They preach obedience, they demand sacrifice, and when the time comes, they justify the unthinkable. To the common citizen, the ecclesiarchy is the guiding light of humanity, the sacred keepers of the Emperor's word. Every preacher, every confessor, every high-ranking cardinal presents themselves as a servant of his divine will, speaking in his name and ensuring that his people remain faithful. But here's the reality. Most of them are not just believers. They are manipulators. They understand that faith is the perfect tool of control, that a population steeped in religious devotion will never turn against its masters. And they use this power ruthlessly. War is sacred. That is the message that echoes through every ecclesiarchy sermon. There is no such thing as a pointless battle, no such thing as a wasted life. If the Emperor wills it, then entire planets can be sacrificed without hesitation. This is how the Ministorum justifies the unrelenting meat grinder of the Imperium's wars. Millions of guardsmen thrown into the jaws of certain death? They are martyrs for the cause. An entire hive city burned to the ground to root out a single suspected heretic? A holy cleansing. Even the most brutal exterminatus, the complete destruction of a world, is framed not as a tragedy, but as an act of mercy, ensuring that no corruption remains to threaten the Imperium. The terrifying part is that many within the ecclesiarchy genuinely believe what they preach. This is not just about power. It is about zealotry so deep that it becomes indistinguishable from madness. Some truly think they are saving humanity, that every atrocity they commit is righteous because it is done in the Emperor's name. But others, those higher in the ranks, the ones who see the full scope of the Imperium's suffering, know better. They know that faith is a tool, that without it, the Imperium would collapse into anarchy. And so, they keep the machine running, not out of devotion, but out of necessity. There are theories among some fans that the highest ranks of the ecclesiarchy might not even believe in the God Emperor at all. To them, the Imperial cult is nothing more than a means to an end, a way to ensure absolute control over the masses. They do not pray, they scheme. They do not seek enlightenment, they seek power. And if millions must die to maintain their grip on the Imperium, then so be it. After all, in a galaxy where heresy lurks behind every shadow, where the whispers of chaos are always waiting to corrupt the weak, is there really such a thing as too much devotion? But whether true believers or master manipulators, the result is the same. The ecclesiarchy has turned faith into a weapon, and the Imperium is drowning in the blood it spills. There is no escape from it, no questioning. Billions live and die by its decree, their fates sealed the moment they are born. And the most horrifying part? The system works. The Imperium endures, not because of strength or strategy, but because its people are too blinded by faith to see the chains around their necks. The Imperial cult presents itself as a monolithic, unbreakable faith, one emperor, one doctrine, one absolute truth. But the reality? It's anything but unified. Beneath the surface, the cult is a tangled mess of conflicting interpretations, radical sects, and dangerous deviations, all vying to prove they are the true servants of the Emperor. And the worst part? The ecclesiarchy knows this. They encourage it, because nothing keeps the masses more devoted than the constant fear that their faith might not be enough. Some of these sects are just harmless variations, different ways of expressing devotion, slight deviations in ritual and scripture. But others are terrifying. There are those who believe that suffering is the purest form of worship, that only through pain can the soul truly prove its devotion to the Emperor. They flagellate themselves until they are nothing but raw flesh and bone. They burn away their own eyes so they might see his light. They throw themselves into war zones unarmed, believing that faith alone will protect them. And when they die, their deaths are celebrated, their corpses treated as holy relics, proof that their sacrifice was righteous. Then there are the militant fanatics, the sects that believe the Imperium is not nearly devout enough. To them, even the ecclesiarchy is weak, too lenient, too hesitant in its crusades against heresy. They take it upon themselves to purge their own worlds, slaughtering anyone they deem insufficiently faithful. Some of them rise to power, turning entire planets into living shrines where doubt is met with immediate execution. Others remain in the shadows, secret cults within the cult, whispering in the ears of governors and military leaders, urging them toward ever greater acts of zealotry. And then there are the truly dangerous ones, the ones that cross the line between devotion and madness, between faith and heresy. Some sects, in their blind worship, have begun to believe things that would horrify even the most hardened inquisitor. Some whisper that the Emperor speaks to them directly, that they alone understand his will. Others claim that the Astronomicon is his divine voice, that its light is not just a beacon for ships, but a holy message that only the worthy can hear. There are even those who believe that the Emperor does not want to be worshipped, that true faith means rejecting the cult entirely. These heretics, ironically, are often among the most devout, but their ideas are so dangerous, so disruptive, that the Inquisition hunts them as relentlessly as any chaos cult. And that's the real irony, isn't it? The Imperial cult exists to unify humanity, to ensure absolute obedience and unwavering belief. But in doing so, it has fractured into countless interpretations, each one convinced it alone holds the truth. The ecclesiarchy does its best to suppress the most dangerous ones, but they can never eliminate them completely. Because faith, real faith, is unpredictable. It evolves, it shifts, and no matter how tight the grip of the Imperial cult, no matter how many are burned for heresy, new sects will always rise. Some fans argue that this is the biggest weakness of the cult, that, despite its terrifying power, it is not as monolithic as it appears, that one day these fractures might tear it apart. Others believe that the Imperium needs these sects, that the constant struggle to prove one's devotion is the only thing keeping it alive. But one thing is certain, there is no such thing as a single Imperial faith. There is only endless devotion, endless paranoia, and an unrelenting war to prove who among the faithful is truly worthy. The greatest irony of the Imperial cult is that the one figure at the heart of it, the Emperor himself, never wanted to be worshipped. In fact, he spent his entire rule trying to eradicate religion, to purge superstition from humanity's mind and replace it with reason, science, and progress. And yet, here we are. 10,000 years later, his name is spoken in endless prayers, his image is etched onto every surface of the Imperium, and his will is interpreted not through logic, but through blind, unquestioning faith. If the Emperor could see what had become of humanity, would he weep? Would he rage? Or perhaps worst of all, would he even care? This is one of the most fiercely debated topics among fans. Some believe the Emperor still has some shred of awareness, trapped within the Golden Throne, unable to act but still capable of thought. If that's true, then he must see what the Imperium has become, an empire of zealots, a civilization that has abandoned the very ideals he once fought for. And if he sees it, does he despair? Does he scream in silence, powerless to stop the monstrous machine of faith that now bears his name? Or has he accepted it, realizing that maybe, just maybe, humanity needs this kind of devotion to survive? Others argue that the Emperor's divinity is not just a mistake, but an outright tragedy, that his godhood, as defined by the ecclesiarchy, is nothing more than a lie that has shackled humanity, dooming it to eternal stagnation. The Emperor was a man, an immortal and incomprehensibly powerful man, but still a man. His rule was not built on divine miracles. It was built on strategy, on psychic mastery, on a vision for a united secular empire. His goal was to uplift humanity, to guide it toward a future where it no longer needed gods. But now, his name is invoked to justify ignorance, to suppress knowledge, to maintain a status quo that has kept humanity in the dark for millennia. And then, of course, there's the more controversial perspective, the one that suggests that, despite everything, the Imperial cult might have actually been the right path all along. That even if the Emperor never wanted to be worshipped, his godhood is now an undeniable reality, because faith, in the grim nightmare of the 41st millennium, is power. Enough people believing in something can make it real. The warp, the immaterium, is shaped by thought, by will, by sheer conviction. If the Emperor was once just a man, does it even matter anymore? If billions upon billions of souls pour their faith into him every single day, if his name alone holds back the horrors of chaos, can we really say he isn't a god? Some theories go even deeper, suggesting that the Emperor's refusal to be worshipped was not just ideological, but practical. That he knew what godhood would mean, that he knew the dangers of being bound by the faith of others. Because once something is truly divine in the eyes of the masses, it ceases to be its own entity. It becomes a reflection of its worshippers, shaped not by its own will, but by their belief. If the Emperor were ever to return, would he still be himself? Or would he be something else entirely, something twisted by 10,000 years of religious devotion, transformed into a god not by choice, but by sheer force of belief? The truth is, we may never know. Whether the Emperor's godhood is a mistake, a necessity, or an inevitability, one thing remains certain. The Imperial cult is no longer just a religion. It is the foundation upon which the entire Imperium stands. It does not matter what the Emperor wanted. It does not matter whether he approves or condemns. The cult exists, and it is not going anywhere. The question is not whether humanity has betrayed the Emperor's vision. The question is whether that vision ever truly had a chance to survive. The Imperial cult does not tolerate doubt. It does not allow for interpretation. It does not permit even the whisper of an alternative belief. In the Imperium, to question is to betray. And to betray, even in the smallest, moe, is to die. This is not a system that simply discourages heresy. It erases it. Any deviation, no matter how minor, is met with immediate and overwhelming force. A simple question: why must we suffer? Did the Emperor truly want this? Is there another way? Is enough to bring an entire world to ruin. It doesn't matter if the question was asked in honest curiosity or whispered in desperation. It does not matter if the person who asked it was faithful their entire life. The moment doubt is spoken, it must be silenced. And the methods of silencing are as varied as they are brutal. Sometimes it is as simple as execution. A single bolt round to the head, a swift, merciful purge of an infected mind. But more often it is a display, a public burning, a mass execution, an entire hab block turned to ash because one person within it dared to think outside the bounds of faith. The Inquisition does not simply punish heresy. It makes an example of it. Because fear, more than faith, is what keeps the cult alive. The treatment of psychers is perhaps the most obvious proof of this unyielding dogma. These individuals, born with a connection to the warp, could be humanity's greatest asset. In another world, another time, they might have been scholars, innovators, a bridge to a new understanding of the universe. But in the Imperium, they are a plague, a threat to be chained, controlled, or destroyed. Most psychers will never live past adolescence. They are harvested in terrifying numbers, shipped off to Terra to be drained of their essence in service of the Astronomicon, or worse, culled before they can ever become a problem. Those few who are allowed to live, sanctioned psychers, battle seers, astropaths, exist only under the most oppressive conditions imaginable. They are watched, monitored, and treated with the same level of caution as a live grenade in a crowded room. And if they step out of line, if they show even the slightest hint of instability, they are purged without a hesitation. But it's not just psychers who suffer under the iron grip of the cult. Even those who have never touched the warp, never spoken against the Emperor, can find themselves condemned for something as simple as misplaced faith. The cult does not just demand belief, it demands correct belief. A man who worships the Emperor but fails to kneel at the right moment can be burned for heresy. A woman who prays daily but utters a single sentence that contradicts official doctrine can be dragged into the streets and shot. Entire planetary populations have been wiped out because they followed the wrong interpretation of faith, because their preachers emphasized the Emperor's wisdom instead of his wrath, because they dared to think there was room for mercy in a galaxy of war. And then there are the true rebels, the ones who reject the cult entirely. These people do not last long. A rogue scholar who uncovers the truth about the Emperor's original vision will never have a chance to share it. A governor who dares to suggest a more tolerant approach will be dead before his words reach the masses. And a simple citizen who stops praying, who no longer bows his head in blind devotion, will disappear into the machinery of the Imperium, never to be seen again. Some fans argue that this level of suppression is necessary, that without it, chaos would take root and humanity would be lost. that the horrors of the galaxy do not allow for freedom of thought, because freedom of thought leads to weakness, and weakness leads to extinction. Others believe the opposite, that this ruthless elimination of alternative ideas is what truly damns the Imperium, that it prevents humanity from evolving, from escaping the endless cycle of war and suffering. But regardless of where one stands, the truth is undeniable. The Imperial cult survives because it does not allow competition. It cannot coexist with differing views. It cannot tolerate even the possibility of another way. And as long as the Imperium endures, the cult will ensure that no one, not even for a moment, dares to think otherwise. Faith is the Imperium's greatest weapon. Not its fleets, not its armies, not even the towering war machines that stride across the battlefields of the galaxy. Those are just tools. The real weapon, the one that has kept the Imperium alive despite its countless enemies, is fanatical, blind devotion. The kind of faith that does not hesitate, the kind of faith that does not question, the kind of faith that turns entire populations into willing sacrifices, throwing themselves into war zones and massacres with nothing but the belief that their deaths serve a higher purpose. For the Imperial Guard, this is everything. The Astra Militarum does not win wars through superior tactics or overwhelming technology. It wins because it has more bodies to throw into the grinder than the enemy has bullets. An Imperial Guardsman does not fight because they expect to survive. They fight because they believe their death will please the Emperor. They charge into hopeless battles with nothing but a lasgun and a prayer because they have been told that faith is their greatest armor, that the Emperor watches over them, that no sacrifice is too great in service to him. And so, they die in the millions, unflinching, unwavering, knowing that to falter, even for a moment, would be worse than death itself. This is not just military discipline. This is engineered insanity. The ecclesiarchy, the commissariat, the preachers who march alongside the regiments, these are the ones who ensure that faith remains absolute. A guardsman who hesitates, who questions, who even considers retreat, is not just a coward. They are a traitor. And traitors are met with a bolt round to the skull, executed by their own commanders or by the fanatics who fight beside them, because death is not the enemy. Doubt is. And what about the Adeptus Astartes? The Space Marines, the Angels of Death, surely they are not as blinded by faith as the common soldier? It's complicated. Some chapters, like the Ultramarines, still cling to fragments of reason, to some understanding of strategy and discipline beyond religious fervor. But others have embraced the Imperial cult in ways that make even the ecclesiarchy seem restrained. The Black Templars, the Celestial Lions, the countless successor chapters that wage eternal war in the Emperor's name, these are warriors who do not see battle as necessity. They see it as worship. They do not fight to win. They fight to purge, to cleanse, to prove their worth through fire and blood. And then there are the civilians, the billions upon billions of people who will never see a battlefield but are still consumed by the same fanatical devotion. They sacrifice their own children to the Schola Progenium, knowing they will never see them again. They work themselves to death in factories, believing that each rivet, each lasgun they produce is an offering to the Emperor. They tear apart their own families at the first sign of heresy, turning in loved ones, neighbors, and even themselves to the authorities, all to prove their loyalty. They do not need a commissar's bolt pistol at their back to obey. Faith has already done the job. Some fans argue that this kind of fanaticism is what has kept the Imperium alive, that without it, humanity would have crumbled long ago, torn apart by chaos, xenos, or its own internal weaknesses. Others believe the opposite, that this blind devotion is the real reason the Imperium has stagnated, that it has turned humanity into little more than willing slaves, unable to evolve, unable to grow, trapped in an endless cycle of war and suffering. But regardless of which side of the debate one falls on, the reality is undeniable. Faith is not just a belief in the Imperium. It is the fuel that keeps its war machine running. It is the fire that burns away doubt, fear, and reason. And as long as that fire rages, the Imperium will never lack soldiers, never lack workers, never lack people willing to die without hesitation. Because in the end, what is a single life, a single soul, in the face of the Emperor's will? It is easy to look at the Imperium and see nothing but strength, an empire that has endured for 10,000 years, unyielding in the face of horrors that should have destroyed it long ago. But beneath that strength, beneath the endless wars and towering cathedrals, there is something far more terrifying. The Imperium does not survive because it is strong. It survives because it has perfected the art of turning its people into weapons. Not just soldiers, not just servants, but true believers. Souls so consumed by faith that they will march willingly into death without hesitation, without regret, without even a moment of doubt. This is the power of the Imperial cult. It does not just create warriors, it creates martyrs. To die for the Emperor is not a tragedy. It is the highest form of devotion. And because of this, the Imperium never runs out of bodies to throw into the fires of war. A world can be bled dry, its entire population spent in a single campaign, and there will always be another, ready to offer up its people just the same. The Imperial Guard is the most obvious example of this. No military force in the galaxy fights the way they do. There is no retreat, no surrender, no concern for casualties. A battlefield littered with the corpses of 1 million guardsmen is not considered a defeat. It is a necessary sacrifice. The ecclesiarchy teaches them that fear is heresy, that survival is irrelevant, that all that matters is obedience. And so, they charge forward, even when the enemy is stronger, even when the battle is lost before it begins, even when they know, with absolute certainty, that they will not make it out alive. Because faith has told them that their deaths serve a purpose. But the effects of this fanaticism go far beyond the battlefield. It shapes the very structure of Imperial, our society. In the hive cities, in the manufactorums, in the spire-topped palaces of the ruling elite, the same blind devotion dictates how people live and how they die. A factory worker who collapses at their station from exhaustion is not a victim of cruelty. They are an example of faith. A scholar who burns books deemed heretical does not see it as a loss of knowledge. They see it as a holy act, purging corruption before it can take root. A mother who gives up her child to the black ships, knowing they will never return, does not weep for them. She prays that they will serve the Emperor in death. And what about the Space Marines? Surely they, of all people, are immune to such blind devotion. Not quite. Many chapters still hold on to fragments of the Emperor's original ideals, seeing themselves as warriors first, not zealots. But there are others, so consumed by faith that they no longer see war as strategy, but as a form of worship. The Black Templars, for example, do not fight for a victory. They fight for purity, for holy destruction, for the eradication of all that is unclean in the Emperor's eyes. To them, battle is not a means to an end. It is the end. The fight never stops, because the war itself is the act of devotion. Some fans argue that this level of fanaticism is necessary, that without it, the Imperium would crumble, that only through unwavering faith can humanity stand against the horrors of the galaxy. Others believe the opposite, that this blind obedience has doomed the Imperium to stagnation, that it has turned an empire that once sought to unite humanity into a prison of its own making. But whichever side one takes, there is no denying the truth. The Imperial cult has done more than enslave humanity. It has shaped it into a weapon, one that will never stop, never question, never break. The Imperium does not need hope. It does not need progress. It does not even need victory. All it needs is faith. Because as long as there is faith, there will always be more bodies to send into the flames. The Imperial cult is a prison with no walls, a chain that binds humanity not through force, but through belief. It is not a tyranny in the traditional sense. It does not need constant oppression, does not require an unceasing display of power to keep people in line. The genius, or rather the horror, of the cult is that it has made its chains invisible. It has convinced the Imperium's people that their suffering is sacred, that their slavery is devotion, that to even consider a world without faith is the ultimate sin. And so the Imperium marches on, not because it must, but because it believes it must. The question is, can this ever change? Is there a future where humanity breaks free from the cult, where it steps away from blind fanaticism and into something greater? Or is this just how things will always be? An empire doomed to worship a silent god while it crumbles from within. There are some who believe that change could come, that if the Emperor were to rise again, to free himself from the Golden Throne and walk among humanity once more, he would tear down the faith that has been built around him, that he would shatter the ecclesiarchy, break the chains of religious dogma, and finally lead humanity toward the future he originally envisioned. But that is a fantasy. The Emperor has been silent for 10,000 years, and even if he did return, would he even be the same being he once was? Would he even want to change the Imperium, or has he long since given up on the very people he once sought to protect? Others believe that the only way for the cult to fall is for the Imperium itself to collapse, that only through fire, through complete and total destruction, can something new be born from the ashes. That perhaps, just perhaps, if the Imperium were to shatter, if the ecclesiarchy were to lose its grip, some fragment of humanity might find a way to rebuild, without blind faith guiding its every step. But this too is unlikely. The galaxy is not kind. If the Imperium falls, humanity does not get a second chance. It is consumed by chaos, by Xenos, by the endless terrors lurking in the void. And then there is the most terrifying possibility of all, the idea that there is no change, no escape, no hope, that this is simply what humanity is now, that the cult has dug its roots so deeply into the Imperium's soul that it is impossible to separate them, that even if the ecclesiarchy were destroyed, even if the truth of the Emperor's original vision were revealed, it wouldn't matter. The people of the Imperium do not want freedom. They do not want reason. They want faith. They need it. Because without it, there is nothing left. Perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all. The Imperial cult did not just enslave humanity, it reshaped it. It created a species that cannot imagine existence without worship, without sacrifice, without the eternal promise that suffering has meaning. And so, the Imperium endures. Not because it is just, not because it is strong, but because it cannot imagine a world where it does not endure. Maybe one day, something will change. Maybe one day, the cycle will break. But for now, the Imperium marches on, blinded by its own faith, deaf to the whispers of what could have been, and utterly, irrevocably trapped in the nightmare it built for itself. The Inquisition is not just a tool of the Imperium. It is the shadow looming over every world, the unseen blade always poised to strike. It does not rule openly. It does not need banners or armies, because its power is not in numbers. Its power is in fear. The mere idea of the Inquisition is often more terrifying than its actual presence. After all, how do you fight something you cannot see? How do you resist something that can erase your existence with a single word? At its core, the Inquisition exists for one purpose: to root out heresy before it can spread, to eliminate threats before they can take hold. It has absolute authority. It answers to no one but itself. A single inquisitor can order the execution of an entire planetary government. They can declare wars, dismantle armies, and even, in extreme cases, order an exterminatus, the complete and total destruction of a world. And the most terrifying part? They do not need proof. They do not need justification. An inquisitor's word alone is enough to condemn billions to death. But here's the real question. Does the Inquisition truly serve the Emperor's will, or has it become something else entirely? There are those who argue that it is the only thing keeping the Imperium together, that without it, heresy would spread like wildfire, chaos would take hold, and the Imperium would fall apart. And in a way, that's true. The Inquisition is ruthless, but the galaxy is worse. It is a place where a single rogue psyker can doom an entire planet, where a whisper of chaos can turn an entire sector into a nightmare of mutation and madness. In that sense, the Inquisition's brutality is not just justified, it is necessary, but others believe the opposite, that the Inquisition has become a monster in its own right, an organization so consumed by its own paranoia that it no longer serves the Imperium, it feeds on it. Entire loyal populations have been wiped out because of a single possibility of heresy. Brilliant minds have been purged, scientific advancements lost, all because of the slightest deviation from dogma. How many times has the Imperium damned itself in the name of purity? How many wars, how many disasters could have been avoided if the Inquisition was not so obsessed with ensuring absolute, unquestioning faith? And then there is the greatest irony of all. The Inquisition, in its endless hunt for corruption, is not immune to corruption itself. It is divided into factions, each with its own interpretation of the Emperor's will, each with its own vision for how the Imperium should function. The Ordo Hereticus hunts witches and heretics. The Ordo Malleus fights the demonic, and the Ordo Xenos purges alien influence. But within these factions there are further divisions. Some believe in moderation, in careful, calculated action. Others believe that the Imperium must be reforged in fire, that anything less than total unyielding brutality is weakness. And then there are the radicals, the ones who believe that in order to fight the enemy, they must understand it. The ones who use Xenos technology, who consort with rogue psychers, who even in the darkest corners of the Inquisition dare to use the very power of chaos against itself. So, what is the Inquisition? Is it the last defense of humanity, the necessary evil that keeps the Imperium alive? Or is it a self-serving monster, an organization that has become so obsessed with its own power that it no longer serves the Emperor, but only itself? Fans have debated this for years, and there is no single answer. But one thing is clear. The Inquisition is not just an arm of the Imperial cult. It is the cult, distilled into its purest, most terrifying form. It is the enforcer of faith, the executioner of doubt, and the ultimate reminder that in the Imperium of man, there is only one crime: to question. The Imperium of man is the greatest empire humanity has ever known. It has endured for 10,000 years, spanning millions of worlds, surviving endless wars and horrors beyond comprehension. But at what cost? What has been sacrificed to keep this crumbling empire alive? The truth is, the Imperial cult has done more than just ensure humanity's survival. It has also sealed its fate, trapping it in a cycle of endless war, stagnation, and ignorance. The Imperium may still stand, but the price of its faith has been the death of everything that could have made humanity something greater. Look at what has been lost. The Imperium once held the potential to advance beyond anything seen before, to master technology, to conquer the stars without fear, to evolve into something stronger. Before the age of strife, humanity had spread across the galaxy in ways that modern Imperial citizens could never even imagine. There were wonders, machines of unimaginable complexity, artificial intelligence that could think and reason, advancements in genetics and cybernetics that could have propelled humanity into a new golden age. But now, all of that is gone, buried beneath the weight of religious dogma and blind faith. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the so-called guardians of technology, have turned science into superstition. They do not understand the machines they worship, do not seek to improve them, do not even try to recover the knowledge that has been lost. Instead, they cling to rituals and incantations, treating technological progress as blasphemy. If something breaks, they do not repair it. They perform rites over it, hoping that the machine spirit will be appeased. If something new is discovered, It is not studied. It is feared. How much knowledge, how much potential has been destroyed simply because it did not fit within the rigid dogma of the cult. And it's not just technology. The very idea of progress is heresy in the Imperium. To question the way things are, to suggest that there might be a better way, is to invite death. Scientists, thinkers, philosophers, these do not exist in the Imperium. Those who seek knowledge, who attempt to understand the universe beyond what the ecclesiarchy permits, are branded as heretics and executed. The Imperium does not learn. It does not grow. It simply repeats the same endless cycle over and over, as if terrified of what might happen if it ever tried to change. Even the Emperor's own vision has been lost. He did not want this. He did not want to be worshipped, did not want humanity to become a stagnant, mindless mass of zealots incapable of independent thought. He sought unity through reason, not blind devotion. And yet, in his absence, the cult has reshaped everything in its own image, ensuring that the very people he sought to uplift have become little more than fanatical servants. So, was this inevitable? Could humanity have ever avoided this fate? Some argue that it could not, that the sheer scale of the Imperium, the endless threats it faces, make progress impossible, that in a galaxy as brutal as this one, only faith, only absolute unity through belief could keep humanity from being wiped out, that without the cult, chaos would consume everything, or Xenos would overrun humanity, or the Imperium would collapse into civil war. But others see this as a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Imperium is trapped because it chooses to be. It suffers because it refuses to change. And in doing so, it has become its own worst enemy. Humanity should have been more. It should have been something greater. The Emperor saw it. The age of technology proved it. But now, whatever potential once existed has been smothered beneath the weight of blind faith, crushed beneath the boots of priests and inquisitors who see knowledge as a threat. The Imperium endures, yes, but it doesn't live. It merely survives, trapped in an unending cycle of war, faith, and decay. Perhaps one day something will change. Perhaps one day the chains of the cult will break and humanity will remember what it once was. But until that day comes, if it ever does, the Imperium will remain what it has always been. A graveyard of lost potential, a monument to what could have been, and the ultimate proof that blind faith does not just enslave, it destroys.